Our presentation is on the impact of concentrated animal feeding operations on rural communities in low-income areas. This is just a brief overview of what we'll be discussing in this video. CAFOs stand for concentrated animal feeding operations, also known as factory farming, and they are a result of our reliance in the meat industries. There is also a very high demand for meat products, especially in the United States, which results in hundreds of thousands of large concentrated animal feeding operations throughout the country, which produce over 1 million tons of waste each year. These operations increase profit from animal products since CAFOs have a relatively low maintenance cost compared to non-CAFO operations involving animal feeding. There are many negatives of CAFOs, such as animal cruelty and ethical issues, which are raised by the treatment of animals, a concerning rise in the amount of viruses and drug-resistant bacteria, and what we'll be focusing on this presentation, the effect of human health air pollution. A CAFO is a farming facility which contains a large number of animals which have little space to move freely. These animals have no free range and are forced to remain stationary for most of their lives, while they live in small, highly populated areas surrounded by dead and living animals. There are also APHOS, which are animal feeding operations on lower scale, which the Environmental Protection Agency defines as livestock operations where the animals remain confined for at least 45 days per year and where no grass, crops, nor other vegetation are present. It is concerning that CAFOs are even a higher scale feeding operation since they have at least 1,000 pounds of live weight. Any agricultural feeding operation which discards their waste from the farms into nearby water sources, such as lakes or streams, are also defined as a CAFO. Lastly, this will be talked about later in the presentation, but CAFOs create a lot of problems for the community around them, such as air pollution, and according to a CDC report, there are several types of harmful emissions which CAFOs produce from manure decomposition, which releases gases like hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and methane into the atmosphere in high concentrations.
We chose this topic because people are being taken advantage of and disregarded. The communities that are most affected by CAFO operations deserve to be recognized, and it must be acknowledged that CAFOs are hurting communities and the government must respond to their concerns. Our agricultural system has a real impact on Americans that live their everyday lives. Through our research, it became very apparent that the government has not properly responded in protecting those that live near CAFOs. We think it is important that there be proper regulation in place to contain the pollution. Our research also revealed that legislation has been put in place in the past that favors big agriculture and harms the surrounding community. And the following information comes from a report titled The Impact of Industrial Farm Animal Production on Rural Communities, which came from the Pew Commission on Industrial Farm Animal Production. One main talking point is that CAFOs will bring jobs to rural communities. However, the research revealed that that statement's inaccurate. These operations rely heavily on technology, which in turn will increase the unemployment in these rural regions. These CAFOs do not bring value to the community since they increase pollution and adversely affect property values. Industrialized agriculture has also resulted in lower relative incomes for certain segments of the community. It also has led to greater income inequality and poverty, also leading to a less active Main Street, which decreases economic activity and retail trade and fewer stores in these communities. Even being in the vicinity of these operations can have negative health impacts, as the neighbors of CAFOs have reported upper respiratory issues, digestive tract disorders, and eye problems. They also have been cited as having increased incidences of mood disorders, which include anxiety, depression, and even sleep disturbances. And the research has shown that 25% of confinement workers in CAFOs have some form of respiratory ailment, which is included but not limited to bronchitis, mucous membrane irritation, asthma-like problems, and acute respiratory distress syndrome. And the children that live in those areas also have increased reports of asthma, and there have also been elevated occurrences of wheezing in children that go to schools that are located near CAFOs.
So the case study that I decided to focus on is environmental stressors, perceived control, and health, the case of residents near large-scale hog farms in eastern North Carolina. The study is an exploration of the physical and psychological health impacts of residents near industrial hog farms in eastern North Carolina. It focuses on differences in specific health symptoms, psychological distress, and perceived control between a group of 48 nearby residents and a control group without previous exposure to hog farms. In recent decades, family farms have been replaced by industrial and corporate agricultural operations. Not only do large-scale farming operations tend to draw non-local capital and drive out local family-owned businesses, but they come with a great deal of negative environmental and health impacts. Nearby residents complain of noxious odors, health threats from the hog waste, decreased property values, and community division. A majority of the problem stems from the hog waste, both liquid and solid. Hog waste is stored in large open pits or lagoons like the one pictured above, and have the capacity to store several million gallons. In addition to the odor, residents are concerned that these lagoons are leaking into the groundwater and contaminating their drinking wells. The impact of industrial hog operations on physical health are mostly connected to the dust and gases associated with the odor, which leads to respiratory, sinus, and nausea problems. Nearby residents experience significantly higher rates of headache, runny nose, sore throat, excessive coughing, and diarrhea than the control group. Due to leakage of waste lagoons and runoff from the spray fields, residents also experience health concerns related to contamination of local drinking water. Residents are exposed to increased nitrate levels, bacteria, viruses, and protozoa. Studies have also found that individuals living near hog farms reported significantly more tension, depression, anger, fatigue, and confusion than control subjects. The physiological distress could also be due to a lack of perceived control over their environment with respect to political, economic, and health aspects. Overall, large-scale hog farming has been extremely tolling on Eastern North Carolina residents in all aspects and had very minimal benefits.
When looking into the current regulations behind CAFOS, it's very helpful to do a yearly breakdown of all the sorts of regulatory actions that have been taken. And so first, in 2003, we have the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Permit Regulation and Effluent Limitation Guidelines and Standards for CAFOS, also known as NPDES. And essentially what this regulatory action does is that it clarifies the EPA's regulation requirements for CAFOS under the Clean Water Act and ensures that CAFOS has effective manure management actions as a way to protect the water quality across the country. And so in 2008, we have the revision of the NPDES and how it relates to CAFOS. And essentially what this ruling is the final ruling to continue to restore the maintenance of water quality, again, by ensuring that manure is properly managed as it's generated by CAFOS. And then in 2012, there were a few different regulatory actions that had occurred. First, we have the National Pollutant, again, Discharge Elimination System Permit Regulation for CAFOS. There was a removal of vacated elements in response to the 2011 court decision. And essentially, the EPA revised provisions from the 2008 CAFOS ruling, that in which a Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals had vacated. These vacated elements were specific parts that mentioned that CAFOS are required to have permits when they discharge any form of waste. And so this could stir up some sort of conflict, as if regulatory documents don't specify the importance of permits for accountability purposes. And then we have the EPA administered permit programs for the NPDES. And so essentially the EPA proposed two options to gather information from CAFOS to support the meeting of its water quality protection requirements under the Clean Water Act, to which then later on, the EPA withdrew that rule back in 2012. And then finally, we have the NPDES and CAFOS reporting rule. And so this confirms the regulatory requirements from that 2012 CAFOS rule revision to remove the vacated elements of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals from 2008 and 2003, and thus shortening the document. And then finally, in 2014, we have the Regulatory Flexibility Act, Section 610, review of the NPDES permit regulations, as well as how that relates to CAFOS. And this called for the review of the 2003 NPDES permit. And all of this is to say that there's clearly challenges in the ever-changing nature of regulatory actions that are being taken to manage the pollution that's produced from these CAFOS. And so the regulation of these operations interact with other current regulatory systems, such as the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Acts, to hopefully mitigate some sort of pollution for the betterment of the environment, as well as the betterment of human beings.
Here are the potential solutions. Regulations or rules relocation and specify how far these CAFOs or areas are from each other. Land control by designating protection zones for ecological sensitive areas and communities. Local governments provide conditional use permits to CAFOs operators by specifying criteria to minimize the impacts on the environment and surrounding communities. Policies request impact fees and taxes, policy incentives to increase the use of anaerobic digesters, cap and trade system as a market-based mechanism to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and equalize total greenhouse gas emissions, to mitigate or avoid the environmental impacts, technologies or strategies, including improvements on the process of feed ingredients and dietary enzyme use, which can increase the digestibility, alternative protein sources like peas and faba beans with lower environmental impacts, precision feeding strategies based on animal sex or phases of their life, and on the output side, animal waste treatment, recycle, and recovery as valuable byproducts such as biogas for energy or bioelectricity, like manure separation, composting, and anaerobic digestion. The references. And thank you for listening.